In this video, you're going to start converting the to-do app, our final app, over to that new project structure. Now, we've already gone through this process a couple of times for the Hangman game and for the Notes app, so converting the to-do app is going to be a challenge for you to complete on your own. I'm not going to leave you hanging without any guidance. That's actually the purpose of this video. In this video, we're going to walk through the challenge setup, making sure we all start from the same place and are working towards the same goal. Once this video is over, you'll actually go ahead and try to complete the conversion process. Then, in the next video, we'll start walking through the solution. So let's go ahead and kick things off by cloning the boilerplate. And we're going to do that together since it's easy and we've done it plenty of times before. So I'm just going to switch over to the Finder. From here, I am going to create another copy of the boilerplate folder like we've done for the Hangman game and for our Notes app. Then I'm going to change To-Do app over to To-Do app old, and I will change the boilerplate copy over to To-Do app. Perfect. So now we have To-Do app, which is just a copy of the boilerplate, and we have To-Do app old, which contains all of the old files. Up above, you'll also notice that I have a folder you don't have locally in your project. This is challenge setup, and it's sitting right inside of the root of JS Bootcamp. You can actually grab this folder from the lecture zip for this lecture. So take a moment to download the lecture zip, unzip it, and grab the challenge setup folder. In there, we have a source directory, and in there are 4 JavaScript files. Now, these are the 4 files you're going to need to create for the new To-Do app project setup. In these 4 files I've created for you, I haven't given you any of the JavaScript code. I've just outlined using comments what each file should do. This is going to make sure we're all on the same page, working towards the same thing. So what I'd like you to do is take the source directory in challenge setup and use it to replace the boilerplate source directory, where we just have an empty index.js file. So I'm going to delete the source directory inside of To-Do app. Then I'm going to take the source folder from challenge setup and copy it in there. And then once that's there, we can actually just delete the challenge setup folder altogether. Now, what I'd like to do is to move into Visual Studio Code and take a look at exactly what is inside of those files. First up, we have filters.js. This is going to be a module responsible for managing our filters object, very similar to what we did with the Notes application, where we had our 2 filters. Next up, we have index.js. This is still the starting point for the application, where we're going to wire up some of those basic event handlers and get the initial data rendered to the DOM. Down below that, we have todos.js. This is another module that's going to be responsible for managing our array of to-dos. This will be similar to the notes file in the Notes application, where we managed the notes array data. Last up, we have the views file. This is going to contain a few functions responsible for rendering things to the DOM. Now let's go ahead and actually crack open the individual files. And I'd like to start off with an easy one. Let's go ahead and start off with filters.js. In here, you're going to start off by setting up that default filters object with the 2 filter properties we've been using so far. In this project, that is search text and hide completed. Then you're going to set up 2 functions that are exported to actually allow other files in the application to work with that object. First up, we have getFilters. GetFilters doesn't take any arguments, but it does return that filter object, the one defined up above. Down below, we have setFilters. SetFilters does take arguments. It takes an updates object where you can provide the various filters you want to update. That could be either search text or hide completed or both. Down below, it does not return anything. Its responsibility is to just update that object. Lastly, make sure you actually export the things from this file. Now, once you have this little module in place, you can go ahead and test it like we did with the Notes application by importing both of those functions into index.js. You can then call them and make sure they're working correctly, changing the filters as expected. So that is it for the filters file. Not too bad. From there, I would recommend tackling the todos.js file. This is something else we can test in isolation by just importing the functions into index.js and calling them to mess around and see how data gets stored. So first up, we do still want to start with an empty to-dos array. Next up, we have our 6 methods, many of which we already have. The first one, load to-dos, is going to be responsible for loading the data from local storage into the to-dos array. So we created something very similar to this for the notes application. Next up, we have save to-dos. Save to-dos takes that data from the to-dos array and it saves it into local storage. Neither of these take any arguments and neither of them have any return value. After that, we have get to-dos. Get to-dos is that super simple function which just exposes the to-dos array to other files. So another file can import get to-dos, it can call it, and it gets the to-dos array back as the return value. After that, we have create to-do. Create to-do is going to be responsible for creating a new to-do. The only piece of information we really need to create a to-do is the new to-do text, so that is the only argument this one is going to take. It's not going to return anything, it's just going to add the new to-do to the array, then call save to-dos to save the data. After that, we have two similar functions. The first one is remove to-do. Remove to-do deletes an item from that array and then saves the data, and it takes in just a single argument, the ID of the to-do you want to remove. And then lastly, toggle to-do. Toggle to-do is going to toggle one of the to-do's completed values from either true to false or false to true, and it takes the ID of the to-do we want to toggle. Neither of these need a return value set up. Lastly, make sure you actually call load to-dos in this file to populate that array, then set up the exports, exporting these functions so they can actually be used by the rest of the application. Now, once again, todos.js is something you can build on its own and test on its own. Once you think you've knocked this one out, you can import all of these functions from index.js and you can just mess around with them. You can call them in a specific order to make sure things happen correctly. You could create a to-do, then try to delete it, toggle it, or do something else. Now, after you master the todos.js file, I'd recommend moving on to views.js and index.js. So once you knock out filters and to-dos, the rest of the process is going to be pretty easy, very similar to what we did in the last video where we wrapped up the notes app conversion process. Well, let's go ahead and switch over to views.js and talk about this one. Inside of here, there are going to be three functions that we already have inside of our current old to-do app project. We're going to have render to-dos, generate to-do DOM, and generate summary DOM. Now, render to-dos is going to change just like render notes changed. We were currently taking in the to-dos array and the filters object as function arguments. We can simply import the necessary functions from these two modules and use them inside of render to-dos. So the new version of render to-dos should actually take no arguments and have no return value. It's just responsible for rendering things to the DOM. This is very similar to what we did with the notes application. Down below, the other two functions are going to stay relatively similar to what they're already doing. We have generate to-do DOM, which takes the to-do object and returns the to-do element, and we have generate summary DOM, which takes in the incomplete to-dos array and returns the summary element to be rendered. Lastly, we just have to make sure we export these so they can be used by the rest of the application. Now, inside of here, you are going to have to make some changes to ensure that everything is working with the rest of the application. For example, in generate to-do DOM, we go ahead and set up the event listeners for when someone checks the to-do checkbox or deletes a to-do. You're going to have to make sure to call the correct new function from the todos.js file for either toggling a to-do or removing a to-do. That brings us to the final file for the application, index.js. In here, I have a few general reminders that I have what exactly should be in the file down below. First up, do make sure you change the index.html file to just load in our bundle, and also make sure you run UUID via the npm module in whatever file happens to need it. Down below, for this file in particular, I really just have a few one-line comments for things that we're already doing in the other file. In the old project, that would be the things we're doing in the to-do app file. First up, we're going to have to add those necessary inputs and get the initial to-dos rendered to the screen. Then we're going to set up 3 event handlers. One for the search text change, another for the checkbox change for hiding completed to-dos, and then finally, we want to set up that form submission handler, which we're already doing. Now in here, you want to make sure to take advantage of the new functions you've created in filters.js and todos.js. Last up, you can add a bonus piece of code to this project, something that watches local storage for changes. This is something we did with the notes application, but did not do with the to-do application. It could be a great bonus adding that functionality in. At that point, you should be ready to copy over the styles folder and the images directory as well as the HTML file to the public folder over here, and then run the application and see things work. Now, if you can't get things right the first time around, that's okay. I recommend trying to fix any errors that you're seeing. So sometimes you might get an explicit error in the console. If you do, try to work through that one. Really read into the message and try to figure out what it's saying. You could also use Google to search for that error message and try to figure out exactly what it means. Being able to do that is a great skill set that is going to serve you well down the line. Now, you might get another type of error where it doesn't seem to have any message in the console, but things clearly also aren't working. At that point, it would be best to go back into the part of the code that's responsible for the thing not working and figure out what's going wrong. So if for some reason my search text didn't seem to be filtering things, I'd probably start here first where I have the search text handler to make sure that was wired up correctly. All right, that is it for this challenge setup. It's now your turn to go off and actually convert the project. Take as much time as you need to knock this one out. It is one of the last big challenges for the course, so by nature, it's going to end up being one of the hardest. Maybe it takes you 3 hours today, or maybe you spend an hour a day over the next 7 days. It doesn't really matter how long it takes you to complete the challenge. What's really important, though, is that you give it an honest try, that you try to convert things on your own. That's going to give you as much real-world hands-on experience writing new code and refactoring code as possible. And that's going to be super important for when you go off after this course and try to use JavaScript to build applications. So don't cheat yourself out of a good experience. Do try to actually knock out this conversion process on your own. But remember that in the end of the day, I am still going to walk you through how to solve all of this step by step, line by line, until we have the completed application working together. And that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video where we're going to start working through the challenge solution.